those of you who've been here, this sounds familiar. Jesus continued. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided up his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he'd spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Thanks be to God for the reading and the understanding of His holy, blessed word. Those of you who are looking at me funny, this sounds familiar. This is the 3rd week of a series that we've been doing on Luke chapter 15. 3 weeks on the prodigal son. This is, after 2 weeks of looking at the sons, today we do an in-depth look at the father and his response to his sons. One of my favorite preachers calls this tale the parable of the dysfunctional family. Barbara Brown Taylor is her name. I kind of like that. I think it fits. And not just for 2 sons who are disobedient, but also in looking at this father. Yes, the father, if we look at his behavior through the lens of the culture in which he lived, he did everything wrong. I guess I really only had one question for the father. Looking at this story and seeing it 1,000 times, the one question I want to know the answer to is this: why would he allow his younger son to go? After all, if Jonah came to me tomorrow and said, "Dad, I want my share of my inheritance," first of all, it'd be a pretty sad state, okay? But secondly, I wouldn't give it to him. He's too young. He couldn't handle it right now. I don't want Jonah to get hurt. So I would not let him go. I wouldn't give it to him because I love him. Make no mistake. Restraint is not just a weapon the parents use to exercise control. Sometimes it's a cushion to lighten the blows of a hard and difficult world. I'll ask it again. Why would the father allow that younger son to leave? The truth of the matter is that the people in the community where this father lived must have been asking that same question. The Pharisees who were overhearing this story certainly were asking that same question. You see, that society held fathers up on a high pedestal. Men are all elbowing their wives at this point. Fathers were to be respected. They were to be honored. They were to be listened to above all others. It's so important that there's even a commandment about it. Remember? Honor your father and mother, that all will go well with you. The truth of the matter is that fathers were put up on a pedestal. And friends, they were expected to act in a way that was worthy of respect and honor. They were expected to act in accordance with the rules of that problem with this story for its original hearers is that there were 3 rules that all fathers never broke. You want to hear them? I said, you want to hear them?
Yeah.
There were 3 rules that fathers never broke. Fathers never divided up their inheritance. Their land that was given to them was a gift of their forefathers. It was to be passed on to their sons. It would have been a smack in their face to their descendants, to their ancestors, to give away their property before they died. Never divided up their land. They never ran in public. Women were allowed to run. Children ran as much as they wanted. Men never ran. Number 3, the number 3 thing that fathers never did, they never argued with their children. Do you know why? Because the father spoke, and his sons and daughters did exactly what he said. There was no argument. They said it, and their sons did it. If you're keeping score, our Father is batting 0, over, none of the above. He does all 3 of these things in this story. So by the measure of the day, this is not a very good father. Any respectable patriarch would not behave in such a way. Now, I don't want you to think that all sons in that day obeyed their fathers, because that's probably not true. They were smart alecks like we are. They were in trouble like we are. Here's the difference. A father was expected not to embrace, not to claim sons who acted in the way that these boys in these stories acted. That's the difference. The Old Testament law makes allowances for what to do with disobedient sons. First comes from the Talmud, the rabbinic teachings of the early Jewish fathers. This is what it says. It says, if a young man goes off and he blows his father's inheritance, if he squanders his wealth at the hands of Gentiles, would have been for them. If he squanders his wealth at the hands of Gentiles, then he wouldn't come back to that community because it brought too much dishonor to his family to return. Now, if he was dumb enough to come home after losing his inheritance to Gentiles, then here's what happened. The entire town would come out, and gather around him in a circle. They would take a large earthenware jug that was filled with burnt nuts and corn. They would break it. They would shout his name all at once. And then they would all turn their back to him. The ceremony was called a ketzatah. So that's as close as I can come to being able to pronounce it. And it was done. When it was done, it was basically telling that kid that he wasn't welcome around there anymore. That he might as well go and live with the pigs again, because there was no place for him there in that community. He was a cosmic orphan after that. Now, if that sounds harsh to you, then you don't want to read what I'm about to read. Deuteronomy 21 talks about what to do with a son who is disobedient. Here's what it says. If someone has a stubborn and rebellious son who does not obey his father and mother and will not listen to them when they discipline him, his father and mother shall take hold of him and bring him to the elders at the gate of his town. They shall say to the elders, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey us. He's a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of his town are to stone him to death. You must purge the evil from among you. All of Israel will hear it and be afraid. This sounds terrifying to us, and it is. I don't believe it happened a lot, but this was not done out of murderous rage. When this was done, it was not done out of hatred. It was the community rule because they didn't want such a pattern to be the norm. It was a community rule because the emphasis was on the need of the group, not the need of the individual in that culture. It was a community rule because they didn't want every son in the village to take his father and squander his wealth. They didn't want every son in the village to able and take apart that village from the foundation on which it stood. It was about doing things the right way for the good of the group. And the judgment from Scripture in Deuteronomy 21 would have applied to the older son as well as the younger. Did you hear me? It would have applied to both. So perhaps you understand the question that I asked when I asked it. Why would the father allow his younger son to go? I think I know the answer. Though it pains me as a father to say it. I think he let his younger son go because love cannot always constrain. Love cannot always push and hold back the people that we care for. True love can be rejected just as easily as it can be returned. It can't. There is no suffering without great love. So the father, unable to hold his son back any longer, lets him go. Now, I don't understand a lot in this story, but this much I know. It wasn't until he let his younger son go that the father really began to suffer in this story. Philip Yancey tells a story about a friend of his who was dealing with the daughter who was giving he and his wife, quite a bit of trouble. She was 15 years old, and they discovered that without the knowledge, she was taking birth control. Several nights, she'd not even come home at all, and the parents kept trying different forms of punishment, different things they could do to get her attention and bring her back to reality, all to no avail. She lied and deceived them. She found a way to turn the tables, and she said, "Well, this is your fault. If you weren't so strict, none of this would happen," she told him. Nancy's friend told her, "I remember standing in front of the plate glass window in the living room one night, staring out into the darkness, waiting for her to come home. He said, I felt such rage. I wanted to be like the father of the prodigal son, and maybe I was. I was so furious with her for the way that she was using her freedom to hurt us, to manipulate us. And in fact, she was actually hurting herself more than she was hurting anyone else. And yet, he said, when my daughter came home early that next morning, it was not anger that I met her with. I wanted nothing in the world so much as to take her in my arms and to tell her of the love that I had for her. To let her know again that I only wanted the best for her. That I was a helpless, lovesick father. I was a helpless, lovesick father. Friends, I wonder if that's not the way that our God is portrayed in this story. I'm afraid it is. I'm afraid it is. What I think surprises me, what I think the really scandalous part would be for the original readers of this text, is the passion with which the God of the universe seeks the one that is lost. Read Luke 15, all of it, not just the part we focused on. The lost coin, the lost sheep. He leaves the many behind and searches for the one. The economics of divinity suggests that God should be concerned with the whole. And yet, just as that society was teaching its people that the community mattered more than the individual. But that's not who our God is in this story, is he? The God of the universe is set on pursuing and chasing after the ones who wander away. The God of the universe pursues us. In her book, Traveling Mercies, Anne Lamott tells the stories of her conversion. Things were not going well for Anne. She had been involved in an affair with a married man. They produced a child that she had decided to have aborted. She was addicted to cocaine. And her best friend in the world was dying of cancer. During this time, she would occasionally drop in at an African-American church. that was down the street from where she lived. And she said she never stayed for the sermon. It didn't interest her. She would go in for the music. She said she loved the music. One night she came in after a long day. She was kind of caught up, spiraling downward with all that was going on. She was disgusted with herself, she said. She drowned her sorrows that day in alcohol and drugs, and finally fell into bed at about 3 in the morning. Shaky and sad, she smoked a cigarette, turned off the light, and she describes all that happens better than what I could. Here's what she says. After a while, as I lay there, I became aware of someone there with me, hunkered down in the corner. And I just assumed that that was the longing that I always felt for my dad on days, bad days like that. The feeling of presence was actually so strong that I turned on my light to make sure that there was nobody in the room with me. And of course, there wasn't. But after a while, in the dark again, I suddenly knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that it was Jesus there in the corner of my room. I felt it as surely as I feel my dog as I write this now. I was appalled. I thought about what my friends would say if I became a Christian, and it seemed an utterly impossible thing that simply could not be allowed to happen. So I turned on my light and spoke to that presence in my corner. I would rather die. I felt him just sitting there in the corner of my bedroom, looking at me with patience and love. And I tried to switch my eyes shut, but that didn't help, because I wasn't seeing Jesus with my eyes. Finally, I slept, and in the morning, Jesus was gone again. That experience left me shaky, she said. But I thought it was just an apparition, born of fear and self-loathing, of booze and grief. But then everywhere I went, I had this feeling that this little cat was following me. Wanted me to reach down and pick it up and pet him. Wanted me to open the door and let him in. But I knew what would happen. You let a cat in one time, you give it just a little milk, and it stays forever. That next Sunday, I went back to that church, and I was so hungover that Sunday morning that I couldn't even stand for the songs. And this time I stayed for the sermon, not because I was curious, because I was too sick to leave. I thought the sermon was ridiculous, like someone trying to convince me of the truth of extraterrestrials. But the last song was so deep and pure that I could not escape. It was as if the people were singing in between the notes, weeping and joyful all at the same time. And I felt like their song or something was rocking me in their room, holding me like the scared kid I was. And I opened up to that feeling, and it washed over me. I began to cry, and I ran from that place after the benediction. I raced home, and I felt that little cat racing at my heels the whole way. I walked down the dock, past dozens of potted flowers, under a sky that was as blue as one of God's own dreams. And when I opened the door of my home, I stood there a minute, hung my head, and said, I quit it. I quit it. I took a long, deep breath and said out loud, all right, Jesus, you can come in. That, she says, was my beautiful moment of conversion. The God we serve pursues us, friends. Remember the story about me? Father runs. He broke the rule. Aristotle says great men never run. But this man is not listening. You know why? Because he looks off in the distance and he sees his son returning home. He sees his son coming home. He knows that the only chance he has of having a son again is getting to him before the community gathers around him and announces him cut off forever. Or worse yet, takes that right in their hands and stones him to death at one sight. This man is convinced that he's got to get there first So he pulls up his robe and he shows off his pale ankles. This man kicks off his sandals and arms flailing, probably running like a girl, he takes off at full speed for his son. When he asked his servants to bring the robe, the sandals, when he asked him to bring the ring, he tells them to do it quickly. Why quickly? Because he knows that they need to see his willingness to take his son's shame upon himself, so that everybody in town will know that this son was lost, but his daddy found him. So that everybody in town will know that this son was dead, but he's been brought to life again. So that father runs, not because his son has brought pride to the family, not because this son is worthy. His father runs because he'd rather be a bad father with the son than a righteous one who was cut off from the one he loves. This love-sick father, arms flailing, panting the whole way, runs like a fool. He embraces his son and kisses him, because you don't kiss servants. You kiss sons in front of everybody. The father restores his son. I really hope you haven't come to church the last couple of weeks and he's not talking about that story again, is he? Friends, I've spent 3 weeks on this story for a reason. I believe that this story is the essence of the good news of Jesus Christ. I've told it to you for one reason, with one hope. Seeing this small glimpse of the Father's undying love for you. That you would turn. That you would run to Him. That you could know the unending joy and celebration. That you, friends, once dead, could have the breath of God breathed into your lungs anew. I'm going to ask the band to come and lead us in our closing song, which is Amazing Grace. As we sing, as you lift your voice in this song, I want you to know this is an invitation. This is a hymn of response. So if God has planted something in your heart through this series, or He's planted something in your head, then friends, come to the altar and allow our Heavenly Father to deal with you. Come. The altar is open. I invite you to stand and sing our closing song.